Now that I have the waistbands pinned to the bodice, I'm going to go ahead and sew those. So I threaded my machine, I got a scrap of fabric, and I tested my thread tension and my stitch length to make sure that everything is coming out the way I want it. And now I will turn on my machine, bring over my bodice and waistband that I have pinned together. Make sure that I have it set to a regular stitch. I have 1/2 inch seam allowance on my pattern, which is the industry standard for woven fabrics. So that's probably what you have on your pattern as well. Because my pattern has 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm lining up the edge of my fabric to the 1/2 inch mark on the throat plate. I'm going to remove pins before I sew over them. I'm going to backstitch where I start and stop. Just a tiny backstitch, not a lot. So a little backstitch, 1/2 inch seam allowance, remove the pin before I sew over it, and then backstitch at the edge. And now I'll trim the threads close to the fabric, but I'll leave long tails on the machine so that it doesn't come unthreaded when I start sewing my next seam. I'll grab the other side of the bodice and waistband, sew those together with 1/2 inch seam allowance because 1/2 inch seam allowance is what's on my pattern. It's a regular stitch, backstitch where you start and stop, and remove the pins before you sew over them. Backstitch at the end. Make sure the take-up lever is in its highest position. Use the knee lift to raise the presser foot. Trim the threads close to your fabric, but leave tails on your machine. Next, we'll need to press the seam allowance. We're going to press the seam allowance down towards the waistband. And in the next video, we'll talk about sewing the skirt onto the waistband.